two portions, Nitzavim, Vayelech. Moses is giving his final farewell before Joshua becomes the leader of the Israelites. And Moses has brought us this far, and we're right across the Jordan. I feel like we've been there for weeks. We kind of have been. But of course, even though he doesn't come, he makes his last attempt, a real plea to have the Israelites follow God's commandments. And by the way, we also read Parashat Nitzavim on the High Holy Days. And the Torah portion begins like this. אתם ניצבים היום כולכם לפני אדוני אלוהיכם, ראשכם, שבטיכם, זקניכם, ושבטכם כל איש ישראל. You, all of you, stand here on this day before God, Adonai, your tribal heads, elders, officials, every householder in Israel. תפכם, נשכם וגרעך אשר בקרב בחניך בחיטב עצבך עד שואב מימיך, לבערך בברית אדוני אלוהיך ובעלתו אשר אדוני אלוהיך כרות עמך היום. Including your children, wives, even the stranger within your camp, from wood chopper to water drawer, to enter into the covenant of your God, Adonai. And your God, Adonai, is concluding with you this day with its sanctions. Meaning, no matter who you are, what you do, you are drawn into this covenant with God. Pardon me. And the expectation is the same for every single individual, a deeply rooted commitment to maintain this relationship. And then the Torah portion bookends with a similar idea, which is kind of echoed at the end, but it's a little bit different. So Deuteronomy 30, verse 11-14 reads like this. כי המצווה הזאת אשר אנוכי מצווכם היום, לא נפלטה היא ממך ולא רחוקה היא. לא בשמיים היא לאמור מי יעלה לנו השמיימה ויקחה לנו וישמיענו אותה ונעשנה. ולא מערבל הים היא לאמור מי יעבור לנו אל עבר הים ויקחה לנו וישתחהו אותה ונעשה. Surely this instruction with which I enjoin upon you this day is not too baffling for you, nor is it beyond your reach. It is not in the heavens. Remember that? We're going to talk about that in a minute. It is not in the heavens that you should say, who among us can go to the heavens and get it for us and impart it for us that we may observe it? Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who among us can cross to the other side of the sea and get it for us and impart it on us so we may observe it? No, the thing is very close to you. It is in your mouth. It is in your heart. Observe it. Got it? Great. This is not outside your reach. It is very feasible. It is attainable for each and every one of you to observe God's commandments and maintain your covenant. One of the most mysterious passages in the Talmud tries to help us think about what it means to engage meaningfully in our tradition. And it expounds on this particular section where we're told that it's not impossible. And our rabbis really wanted to share this idea. And so the context is like this. The Talmud story opens, it takes place a generation after the destruction of the temple. So people are in mourning, they're trying to figure themselves out. And much of the laws delineated in the book of Leviticus are no longer relevant. Why? There's no temple. There's no one temple. So they're irrelevant. And so they have to find substitutes for rituals that are not centered around the temple. So here's the story. Stay with me, no sleeping. It's a doozy. Rabbi Eliezer, who witnessed the destruction of the temple, is arguing over the purity of an oven with his fellow rabbis. He poses a question about halakha, Jewish law. The oven in contention is called Tanur Achnai, the oven of Achnai. It is made of broken pieces that are cemented together. A standard interpretive problem. How do we decide? Is it an oven or a broken vessel? That's the dilemma. Okay, you with me? Yes? Good, you're about to get lost. Eliezer says, it's a broken vessel. Once broken, it can never be put together again fully. Maybe that is also his view of the world after the destruction of the temple, maybe not. But this is what the story tells us, and I quote, Rabbi Eliezer makes all of these arguments trying to prove that the oven is not pure, but his colleagues disagree with him. So Eliezer says, if I am right, let the carob tree outside of this window prove it for me and lift up into the air. So the tree flies into the air. And the majority of the rabbis, they don't accept the halakha, which is really amazing, because if I saw a tree floating, I don't know what I would think. So, okay, they don't. They're like, we don't take our rulings from trees. They say that. So Eliezer retorts back. He says, okay, if I'm right, let the river flow upstream, but in the opposite direction, right? And so the river does magically, all of a sudden, the stream flows backwards. Same results, rabbis push back. He doesn't give up, though. He orders the walls of the synagogue that they are in to collapse inward. And the walls begin to collapse inward, but Rabbi Yehoshua rebuked the walls, saying, if Talmudic sages argue with one another about halakha, Jewish law, what business to you, walls, objects, have interfering in our argument? He's yelling at the walls, okay? So out of respect for Rabbi Eliezer, the walls don't completely collapse inward. They remain leaning. Finally, logic and miracles failed Rabbi Eliezer, so he appeals directly to the heavens. And from the heavens descend a voice that the Talmud calls a bat kol, a voice from heaven, bat, meaning the woman's voice, right? So we know it's a female holy voice, but it's a small voice, and it says, why are you disputing with Rabbi Eliezer for halakha? Jewish law is always in accordance with him everywhere. So the bat kol takes Eliezer's side. And Rabbi Yehoshua gets up one more time to his feet, and he says, Lo bashamayim hi. It is not in the heaven. I know what you're all thinking. Where am I having dinner after this? No, that's not what you're thinking. You're thinking, what does a moving carob tree, a river that's flowing in the opposite direction, and collapsing wall, God forbid that happens here, answer any question that has to do about an oven's purity? Great question. Our rabbis are very clever. They understood that in order to generate real halakha, or law, they had to be creative. Interpreting law is really an art form. It's not an exact science. Exodus 23:2 reads, always follow the majority's ruling, which means that we have to take part in interpreting the laws for there to be a majority, which means they're also a minority, multiple minorities sometimes. There has to be a discussion, disagreement, dissent. The law is not in heaven. And we are told at Sinai that the interpretation of Torah is through majority rule. So the rabbis are obligated to use the methods of interpretation given to them by God to the best of their abilities in their time. So when the rabbis concluded that the law of majority, that the oven is impure, that is the law. Sadly for Rabbi Eliezer, he was outvoted. He was wrong because he insists on a particular result which violated the basic procedural principle. The walls accept both Eliezer and the other rabbis because the reproach that miracles are not an acceptable means of determining law. Professor of law Daniel Greenwood puts it very nicely. He says, we understand that the process is more important than the result, that maintaining the integrity of the interpretive system as a human system, speaking to human reason and deciding by the human method of argument and persuasion, followed by a vote, is far more important than whether the oven is actually kosher or not. And Greenwood expounds and says that disagreement and the limits of persuasion are part of the human condition. The Torah is not one law, but infinite law from one God who is also infinite. So how do we know what the law is? It cannot just be from reading the text, let alone listening to the tradition or even bat kols. It is, as the Torah teaches, by following the majority. The same is true, by the way, of our American legal system. The law is not self-maintaining, which we are all seeing all the time today. We cannot depend on the original authors to fix this for us. Laws are not self-explanatory. Interpretive methods are important, but they're not always foolproof, and the majority can sometimes get it wrong. This also reminds us that we must value those in the minority, those that dissent. Their voice in Talmud is also maintained. It's also recorded and written, because it's not about what happens or the outcome or the solution, but about the process, the conversation that takes place. That's the work. That's the real engagement. And that's what it means to live in a society, and that's what it means to be Jewish. As we approach our most holy time of the year, how can we all be part of the conversation in maintaining our tradition while also finding space for one another? Shabbat Shalom.